Hello, everybody, and welcome back to what I promised would eventually be the Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart review. Here we are. I have a lot to say about this game. It's very possibly going to be like as long as the other retrospective videos, even though it's only in one game. But I want to just say up front, so I can just get right into the game, that one, I will be splitting this video up into, this intro, as well as a spoiler-free review, and then a full spoiler review, and then ranking the entire series, including the PS4 game, because I want to. It's my list. And yeah, so if you intend to play this game but haven't yet, I will have in the the time codes down below, I will have when the spoiler section is, so you can either jump right over that, stop the video, come back later, whatever. I want to make sure that if you are super into this and just kind of curious, I still have a section for you that we can show a little bit of footage, get an idea of the game without spoiling anything major. Because, yeah, in the spoiler review, I basically go beat by beat through the entire game. So you probably don't want that part. But, that being said, number two, I have a few things to note about the visuals you will be seeing in this review. This is a PS5 game. You probably know that. It is beautiful, runs at 4K. At least I did it at 4K because I always choose fidelity over performance. But the 4K and HDR stuff don't work when I route the PS5 through my recording equipment. So the game still looks great in the recording, but it's like 1080p 60. So eventually I actually ended up switching it over to performance because that's still hitting like 1440p 60 frames. Figured for the sake of recording, might as well do that. And then also, I played through the game once on my own first. No recording, nothing. I wanted to experience it for myself, kind of, get an opinion through just normal gameplay. And then I rebooted it into the challenge run, which I usually don't do, like for the other games and the reviews I didn't do. But pretty much every Ratchet and Clank game has like a challenge mode that lets you like play the game again with all of your weapons unlocked and everything like that. There's like a bolt multiplier, so you can get tons more bolts. And at least in the PS4 game and this one, there's like Omega variants of each weapon. I don't know if that's true of the last games, because like I said, I didn't play the challenge run in those. But yeah, the idea is there's like a few exclusive weapons and things like that. So what you see on screen might not always match like what I'm actually talking about. If I say something like, there's great weapon variety early on, and you see me using, like, the Rhino weapon in this game, no, you probably don't have that one early on, for example. And on that note, and, like, kind of the gold bolts and everything, this game also has, like, full customization of Ratchet and Rivet with their armor parts and stuff. So I really liked playing around with that stuff, which means very little of the footage I have is, like, their, just base, like, costumes that you have, if you don't customize anything. They are really cool because like even if you don't equip them, you still get various buffs just for like collecting the different armor pieces. So if you get all of them, you can get some nice like damage reduction and stuff against various types of enemies, and like more bolts collected when you pick up bolts, that kind of thing. Anyway, now that all of that stipulation is out of the way, let's get right into the spoiler-free part of the review. So starting off, I actually unironically love that the first thing you see is a cutscene with Rivet. Like, you don't wait too long to play as the titular, Ratchet and Clank. But I think it's nice to kind of establish that this is like a different dimension, and like you're kind of, you're jumping around a bit by showing you like right off the bat, hey, this is not, Ratchet and Clank's world. They're just living in it type thing. That's the one little story tease I'm going to give you, because I just think it does such a good job at like establishing the tone of the game and everything. I have to mention it here. And it also shows that Rivet's a great character on her own. Like, she's not just female Ratchet. But, you know, of course, then it shifts over to Ratchet and Clank for, like, actual playable section. And it's really fun. I mean, you know, you're introduced to all the controls and kind of a, like, a series recap moment type thing. It's a really solid intro that brings in people that have... People? Did I just say people? It brings in people that have never played a Ratchet and Clank game before, and also has some nice little Easter eggs for people that, you know, have just played through the entire series again, like me. But one, like, early complaint I had is the game is surprisingly buggy, especially for an Insomniac game. Like, a lot of its little stuff, like, just kind of, you know, texture pop in, and, like, weird, like, collision detection type things. But there were a few game-breaking moments, and for some reason I ended up recording all of them. Maybe it was like the game was slightly more affected by being run through my recording software. I don't know, but it seemed to hit the most when I was recording, which I'll take. But one specific moment I remember was missing a jump and then just falling forever. No matter what I did, because I could move around and everything in the open space, but no matter what I did, it didn't actually, like, kill me or anything. I just kept falling. So eventually I just gave up and restarted the game. But it was actually pretty amusing, and I'm glad I got footage of it. And then there was a few other spots that just, like, went to a black screen where I couldn't do anything. Like, I literally had to... I could hit the home button and, you know, go out, but I had to basically close the game, and then when I tried to close the game, it would freeze my PS5. And I'd actually read online that, like, that's a pretty common thing that people are having issues with. So, yeah, I'm hoping eventually this game gets a little more patched, but there are some surprisingly game-breaking things. That aside, the story is still nothing revolutionary. Like, I mean, Ratchet and Clank is not on the same level as, like, the Spider-Man games, for example. But it kind of feels like, since this is kind of the first game that's come out post-Spider-Man, I thought maybe it would ramp that up a little bit. And there's definitely an impressive, like, level of scale and a lot more heart, like, a lot more character moments than we've gotten before. Although, again, those PS3 games had some great cinematics, but, you know, the PS4 remake was kind of trash in the story department. And so this one is, like, following up from the PS3 games, and it's got a lot of great story beats and stuff. It's just still fairly formulaic, you know? Ratchet and Rivet are both on fetch quests to go get various things, stop the dimensional rifts from tearing apart every dimension, and stop Dr. Nefarious again. Like, that's the gist of it. There's some, you know, late game plot twists and stuff in there that I'm obviously not going to spoil right now, but a lot of the enjoyment comes from the character moments and being introduced to Rivet. I think she has some really strong characterization moments and things like that, and just kind of seeing, like, some alternate versions of other characters, and, you know, the way that all plays out is really nice. But this doesn't go anywhere that, like, shocked me, really, if that makes sense. But I do like what they've done with Dr. Nefarious in this one. He's very kind of, like, self-aware of how much of an idiot he is. That always, you know, and he always fails and everything. Like, it adds some fun dimension to the character. Dimension. I didn't even mean to make that pun. Anyway, the controls, which I mentioned before, are buttery smooth in this game. I think in large part thanks to the PS5 controller, but they also took some getting used to for a similar reason. It utilizes the new adaptive triggers where there's, like, tension on when you pull the trigger, and it also basically has you, like, auto strafe when enemies are around. So there's no, you know, strafe button needed, which opens that up, and then the weapons are put on those back triggers that have the adaptive pressure to them. So they kind of remapped a lot of, like, where different things are. And after playing 7 games where it was one way, I kind of struggled to adapt. Get it? Adapt. If triggers. Alright, that one is on purpose, I'll admit. Anyway, basically the way the controls work is every weapon has a main fire mode on the, R2 or whatever. And generally it somehow uses the pressure sensitive triggers where like you might pull in halfway for like a single fire mode or all the way down for an alt fire mode. Like I'm trying not to get into spoilers of like the weapons themselves, so I'm keeping it very, high level. And then like with the machine gun type weapons, it just kind of pop, 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 pop. Like it bounces as you shoot, and it feels really satisfying. But because shooting before was on either R1 or circle, depending on the game, they put a new gadget, basically the return of the hover boots, on R1. So for a while, at least in my first run, I would accidentally just kind of speed charge into enemies instead of shooting at them, because I got used to hitting R1 to shoot. So that was kind of tricky. But I still love the new way that you control everything. And then the new Phantom Dash ability that they've shown in all the trailers and everything that kind of lets you, like, Phantom Dash through the air, being on circle. So you can just kind of, Phantom Dodge at any time, which, again, feels very satisfying, very easy to hit. It's right next to the jump button. Like, it's great. I'd be totally okay with this being the new control scheme going forward, especially the auto strafe. Like, it's huge to not have to hold a button to strafe. I didn't realize how, like, convenient that is. Like, it automatically assumes when an enemy is nearby, pulls out your weapon, and goes into auto strafe. So when enemies aren't around, you can pull your weapon out at any time, and it'll still go into auto strafe. But basically it changes the way you move around the field when you have your weapon out. That's kind of the idea. But, good controls are only one part of a good game. The locations themselves are also incredible. I actually remember the names of some of them. Like, that's huge. But they add to the sense of scale in this game in general. So obviously, the fast loading, like seamless transitions really help the pacing of the game in general. But the scale of the levels themselves and just the beautiful vistas on these worlds, these dimensions, planets, whatever, I just kind of kept stopping to admire the sights every now and then. Especially, like, for example, Nefarious City, which again has been shown in all the trailers and everything. It's basically the first planet you visit. The amount of detail on this planet is incredible. The planet itself is fine, but yeah, a lot of those little touches, immediately make you feel like you're in a different dimension, because it's so drastically different from anything we've gotten in past games. And it really, this planet specifically sets the tone for the attention to detail that's in the rest of the game. So you just kind of expect, every time you get to a new planet, you're just going to want to explore every square inch. Which is good, because there's a lot of stuff to get on these planets. For example, one of my other favorite things about this game are the pocket dimensions that functionally are kind of like platforming challenges, with each one sharing a basic structure, like, a purple void with platforms and stuff, but also being completely different. And usually they have some raritanium, which again you use for weapon upgrades and stuff, as well as an optional collectible in them. More often than not, it's one of those armor upgrades that I told you about, like the customization stuff. But yeah, these kind of remind me of my favorite parts in Mario Sunshine, where you lose that flood pack and have to just beat an obstacle course or whatever as, regular Mario. But in this case, you have all your abilities, and it's just a unique test of them. Like, speedrunning across some platforms made of timed explosive blocks, Crash Bandicoot style, for example. Every single one of these challenges is totally different, and like I said, while I all kind of feel visually the same, it's just neat to pull that open and see what's inside. One of my favorite ones uses the parade floats from the beginning of the game, and there's a fun little dialogue bit of oh, that's where these went when dimensions were torn apart, and then you just kind of navigate those, and it's cool. Especially since the game itself can get pretty combat heavy sometimes, these are a refreshing change of pace. Honestly, there's not much else I can say, like, kind of surface level, without spoilers. So I'll finish this up by saying this game is definitely a system seller, if you can even find a PS5 anywhere, and it's the best Ratchet and Clank game. Hands down. It's still not perfect, and it's got some hit or miss weapons, but there's also a lot of them, so you can generally ignore the bad ones. And there's also some gameplay elements that don't feel as good as others, such as the new glitch sections, which are kind of like the door unlock minigames from past games, but in the form of a kind of generic shooting mode that feels too zoomed in and has a nausea-inducing camera. But the new Clank sections are definitely top 3, up there with the Crack in Time and Into the Nexus. Though saying any more about them would also get into spoiler territory, so I'm really struggling here. I'll end off the spoiler-free section by saying that this game continues the narrative from the PS3 games in an actually pretty satisfying way that I didn't expect. And the gameplay feels truly next-gen in the way cutscenes seamlessly transition into gameplay, loading screens are almost non-existent, and basically every element of past games, from fan-favorite locations and weapons, to raritanium upgrade trees, to gadget platforming sections using grind boots, mag boots, slingshot, and more, including some fun new gadgets like the aforementioned Phantom Dash. This truly feels like a love letter to the franchise as a whole, rather than a game that just picks and chooses what elements to bring back like the PS3 games did. Like I said, it's not quite perfect, but it's a very good time and really doesn't overstay its welcome because of how quick-paced it all is and how the dimensional traveling mechanics make the story feel more tied to the gameplay than just another series of fetch quests. Even though that's admittedly what it is. I think it might be because the missions are split between Ratchet and Rivet, so while they play the same, it still mixes up the aesthetic and keeps the quieter character moments from feeling stale, because you have more characters to spread those moments across. It tells a more intriguing story within the series of fetch quests, basically. Huh. I guess I did have a lot more spoiler-free stuff to say after all. Anyway, full spoilers ahead. You've been warned. Now's the time to grab your Dimensionator and go somewhere else if you care about the game being spoiled for you. Alright, starting off with just kind of an offhand mention, the Zircon family is so good. I've always loved Mr. Zircon, I don't know why, but now it's a fully fleshed out family of actual characters, and they're all a lot of fun. Everyone's dimensional doppelgangers are great, actually, with some nice nods to the whole series, from Quark and Skid to Rusty Pete from the Pirate games. Strangely, there's no Talwyn outside of an art frame during the credits, but I guess she's back on Ratchet's dimension and there's no dimensional doppelganger of her. Or maybe Insomniac just didn't want to confuse people with both Rivet and Talwyn, even though Talwyn's not a Lombax, so that's pretty racist. There's also some really solid new characters, such as the Morts, which is basically a whole species of creature named Mort. And they all sound like they're ripped right out of Fargo. They're adorable.
Rivet! How the heck are you?
There's also the new robot, Kit, who is technically Clank's dimensional counterpart, but she has enough depth on her own that she might as well be a new character. Her status as a former warbot with a secret and sordid history with Rivet makes them a really conflicted pair, and it was one of my favorite elements of the story. But gameplay-wise, I wish she was a little more unique. This would have been a great time to bring back the giant mech battles from the PS2 games, but instead she just transforms a few times for cutscenes or passive battles. Maybe that's something they could explore in a Rivet and Kit-focused sequel, but she's still a great new addition that I don't think was even spoiled in the trailers or anything. Also, she's voiced by Deborah Wilson, who is quickly becoming my favorite voice actor, so there's that.
You do not understand. You are not safe around me. I was built to be a weapon, to keep the Emperor's galaxy secure.
Another thing I love about the story in this game is you also get a dimensional counterpart to Dr. Nefarious, and he's like actually competent and kind of scary. Emperor Nefarious, as he's called, is basically who Dr. Nefarious kind of takes over when he goes to the other dimension. So when Emperor Nefarious kind of hears through the grapevine that he's already returned, he's like, "What? No, I haven't." And then he returns, and he's immediately like a much more compelling threat. He's still got some funny, goofy moments, but like he even realizes how stupid Dr. Nefarious is and basically calls him like a crazed fan or something like that and treats him like a pet the entire game. It's pretty great. And it's also kind of nice to see a story where like the villains have the upper hand for a good portion of the game. But anyway, most of these characters, new and old, get surprisingly full character arcs over the course of the fairly short game. So it's really impressive how they're able to both introduce the alternate versions, show what makes them different, and provide closure all within their runtime. Even if those arcs are fairly simple in most cases. It definitely seems like Insomniac has put their Spider-Man storytelling chops to work with juggling all these characters with the excellently framed action scenes. Even if, you know, the emotional payoff and stuff is nowhere near the level of Spider-Man. But speaking of the action scenes, some of these set pieces are absolutely incredible. One in particular stands out to me, where Rivet and Clank are tasked with meeting the Fixer, but find out he's been shut down because he's malfunctioning and can't fix things. They figure they can help, so they go to turn him back on, and he lashes out about how he's broken like everything else and starts destroying everything in an attempt to fix through violence, I guess? There's a metaphor in there, but it mostly seemed like just an excuse for a destructive action scene, which is still fine. Now, in the past I've had issues with some of these more chaotic grind boot sections, but I don't know, as much as I still struggled to react in this one, it didn't feel like the camera or anything was at fault, just my reaction times. And the actual scene was incredible. Basically like a playable cutscene where you loop around the planet trying to find a way to reach the Fixer and, well, fix him before he kills everyone, our heroes included. It's just so visually interesting and high-octane fun that showcases a lot of what I love about the Ratchet and Clank games. Nothing else quite plays like them, and this game really seems to get that. Even if it's a little more combat-heavy still than I would have liked, like I mentioned before. It also has a really nice, like, emotional payoff, I guess, that plays into the idea of, you know, what being broken means, but I'll get into that more in detail later when I talk more about the story. Another example of these crazy action scenes actually involves another gimmicky boss fight, strangely. Pretty much every planet has a crazy, over-the-top action scene though, so it's not that surprising. There's a few points in the game where you can ride these kind of gross little speedles, like speed beetles. Yeah, the name is ridiculous. And at one point, you're essentially chasing a robot boss thing through the swamps, trying to hit speed ramps to launch up on top of the robot and knock it down to cause damage. I've said before how much I miss the hoverboot races, and while this doesn't quite scratch that same itch, it's still a very satisfying race-like scene that honestly is over faster than I would have liked. Yeah, these kind of wild action set pieces, usually mixed with chaotic, dimension-shifting elements, really sell this as a next-gen game, while also just mixing up the gameplay for a diverse, fast-paced, and fun time. Now, you might notice I haven't talked about Ratchet that much yet, and frankly, it's because he's not given as much to do. Basically, every planet is either a Rivet or Ratchet mission. But I found the Rivet planets generally more interesting, and also with more diverse gameplay gimmicks. Every planet has some kind of gimmick, but Ratchet felt more combat-focused since he is by himself for a good portion of the beginning, and then with Kit, who doesn't really play into the gameplay like Clank does. And yeah, he has Glitch, but I already mentioned how much I don't really care for her sections, plus they're really just more combat. For the sake of diversity though, I'll give Ratchet some screen time and say that his best planet is definitely Savali, which is notably more open world than most other planets, and also brings in the aforementioned hover boots to really show off the planet's scope. But it's still almost too big to explore, and its secret's nearly impossible to find until you get the late game Map-O-Matic gadget that highlights all the collectibles on each planet. And yes, I know Ratchet also gets Nefarious City, but as visually interesting as that place is, it's essentially a tutorial planet, so there's not much to actually do. It's just awesome looking. Savali is super fun to explore though, if not a little visually bland in comparison, and it has some of the best platforming sections for him, with a timed challenge section that requires Ratchet to complete platforming obstacle courses to prove his worth, but it's a fairly short section and ends with glitch missions, so that kind of ruins it. But the hover boots in this game are drastically improved with the ability to basically click in the, I think L2 with the, pressure resistance in order to speed up and go like hyper speed once it's fully charged up. And that makes traversing around these large maps super fun, even if it's fairly open and generic. Honestly though, I still love Ratchet as a character, and him and Kit together are cute, but his whole story feels like it's spinning wheels most of the time in favor of introducing compelling lore for Rivet and Kit. The game even ends on the tease that they're finally going to meet the other Lombaxes. How many games now have ended on that possibility? It's getting repetitive and feels like they're just out of things to do with Ratchet otherwise. Though, if they actually follow through with it next time, they need to call the next game Lombax to the Future. There's even a Marty McFly style costume. Come on. But anyway, Rivet, on the other hand, gets planets like Blizar, where you seamlessly jump between dimensions doing some amazing platforming sections, including a better version of Into the Nexus's low-gravity mag boots jump sections, as well as dimension-shifting grind boots sections that had me grinning ear to ear the whole time as you hop between rails and dimensions. Though it is also fairly short. Sure, the planet is a little tough to navigate because you're only seeing the map for the part you're on at the moment, so especially trying to track down collectibles can be a little tricky as you figure out how to get to that part of that dimension. But it's such a cool planet-wide gimmick that I didn't mind the extra map time because it was so fun to navigate. I said I was gonna do these basically planet by planet, but I'm jumping around a little bit because I already mentioned how great Rivet's next planet is with the Fixer and all, though I admittedly forgot the planet's name, and I really just kind of want to show the entire action scene with him. There's so much well-framed and perfectly timed stuff there. But anyway, I do want to circle back to what I mentioned about how well this section handles the idea of being broken. So you've probably seen by now that Rivet has a robotic arm, and she never really brings it up, except for kind of just to fill in some backstory. And I love already that they don't make it seem like she's handicapped or anything. She just has a robot arm. So when she's paired with Clank, who also has a missing arm now, I guess it happened when he was separated from Ratchet. They don't really go into it too much, but anyway, when the Fixer has his existential crisis, he's calmed down not through violence, but by Clank insisting that his disability doesn't make him broken, so he doesn't need fixing. It's a small but great moment for Clank and Rivet to share.
I may be different than I was, but you helped me realize I am still Clank.
I am quite relieved.
And as someone with a disability, I also don't like to talk about because I don't want people thinking I'm broken. It resonated really well with me. Honestly, all the stuff surrounding Rivet and Clank both being disabled is handled super well and pretty tactfully. But then we go back to Ratchet, and yeah, his next planet is fairly generic. It's the enclosed factory-type world that every Ratchet & Clank game has, but it also kind of acts as his take on the dimension-shifting planet, and the gimmicks on this planet fare better than the planet itself. You're trying to fix the Dimensionator using some intense power source, but they end up accidentally breaking one and getting caught by Nefarious's goons, so they escape to the other dimension, where there's a huge monster on the loose. And this makes it feel almost like a BioShock game, complete with elevator attack. Also, there's a hilarious little helper bot named Junkbot that is a big fan of nicknames. But seriously, I love him.
That is Juice, my best friend. He tries to kill me sometimes, but he is a great listener.
He tries to kill you?
We become friends too. You can call him Juicy, or Juicy, or JC. Oh, that is a swell nickname.
Anyway, having to juggle back and forth between a dimension where a bunch of robots want you dead and a dimension where a hungry monster is on the prowl is a strong gimmick. I just don't think the level design here really holds up compared to the rest of the game. It's a lot of dark corridors and bouncy pad platforming. Evading the monster, aptly named Juicy, is a neat and tense mechanic, but it never feels like that much of a threat, as you can basically prevent him from coming after you by breaking these juice canisters. Hence, Juicy. He likes to eat the juice. Drink the juice? He likes to drink the juice. So Junkbot named him Juicy. I didn't say Junkbot was good at nicknames. I said he really likes them. But in the other dimension, the rooms are fairly claustrophobic for the amount of enemies that they send after you, including the obnoxious replicating amoeboids. So yeah, they're both kind of hit or miss areas with cool gimmicks attached. Also, there's another glitch mission here, so She does get a bit more variety and a new attack move, as well as the hint of a larger character arc at work. But it's still not that fun, even if the mystery is somewhat intriguing. I would have honestly just preferred more of the Clank missions, but with Kit in the weird purple realm instead. We do get that eventually, when she's with Rivet, but not now. But speaking of Rivet and Kit, next they return to Sargasso, and I really don't care for this part. Definitely just feels like padding. A lot of times when you return to another planet, it's kind of padding, because you're literally going through the same stuff again. But this one is just a lot of combat waves with not much else, and it ends off with a flying section that feels kinda not fun, because I really don't like how Trudy controls in the first place, using the right stick only to aim and move. And then there's way too many enemies, so it's just a chaotic mess, where the actual things you're aiming for are easy to miss. There is some great lore deepening here though, as Kit finds out she's the reason Rivet lost her arm, and their kind of shared destiny is interesting. But it's not enough to redeem this part of the game. But then the conflict ramps up with the Nefariouses, including some nice comedy for the Emperor, who has been a more straight bad guy so far, so that the Doctor can be the goofball by comparison.
That's it. Where's the joy? The bliss? The murderous enlightenment? Why don't I feel any different?
Because you equated happiness with success. And now that you've achieved it, life is meaningless.
And then Ratchet and Clank head back to Savali to stop them from getting the dimensional map that would let them take over every dimension. This planetary retread works a little better because there's some actual new ground to cover, and I also just kind of love the so-called Bone Goons. They get some good dialogue about those guys. I also love the scope of this mission, as it regularly switches back and forth between the two Lombax heroes and their robot companions. It really brings everything together in a nice way now that they're finally all working as a team, rather than split up across multiple planets. Plus, the gameplay and story come to a head here, with some great pacing of Ratchet on a Speedle, an epic boss fight against some bone enemies, and a stellar final Clank puzzle that really shows how much depth they fit in with only a Lemmings-style guidance mechanic and 4 different traversal options. I do kind of wish there were more of these sections, but what we get is still great, and the whole justification of, like, Clank basically learning the secrets of the dimension and using that knowledge to finally seal the dimensional rift or whatever is pretty cool. Also, the fact that Gary, the weird monk thing, hid the dimensional map inside one of these rifts is also pretty great. But, of course, then the Nefarious twins meet up just in time to take the map, after Ratchet conveniently led them to it, and Kit reveals to Rivet her true Warbot identity in a frankly heartbreaking cutscene that separates the two just in time for Rivet to be left alone to rescue Ratchet and Clank from Zor-Doom prison. It's just great. Really sets the stakes for the end of the game. Though it also helps that Zor-Doom is also pretty great. It's not the most visually interesting, with some muddy lighting and samey interiors, but it's a great mix of combat, exploration, and platforming that nicely showcases the variety this game has to offer, and the traversal here feels really good. A lot of the story conflict comes to a head here too, such as Rivet and Kit falling out, and Rivet even leaving Kit behind, which admittedly feels a little forced, but we don't know enough about her character yet, I guess, to say it's out of character. Just didn't really paint Rivet in the best light, and it felt like it only served to highlight the admittedly epic final moment when Kit returns in giant mech form to help Rivet save the day. So I mean, I guess it's worth it for that, but it underserves this emotional arc a little bit in this moment. And speaking of the final moments, I have skipped over a few planets and story beats along the way, but none of it's terribly important in the grand scheme, so I'm just going to move on to when once again the Nefariouses... it's too many S's. Win and lay claim to Ratchet's home dimension. Specifically his home planet of Megalopolis, I think it's called? I should know that by now. This becomes the setting of the final battle in suitably grand fashion across multiple phases as the whole team gets together, including basically every character we've met so far, and they assist Ratchet and Rivet in taking down the giant Nefarious robot. It's probably my favorite final battle of any of these games because the scale is suitably climactic, and it involves basically everything you've gained along the way, including rift hopping, some light platforming, and basically your entire arsenal of weapons by the time you get through it all. And the way it changes up the scenery and targets keeps the combat from getting too stale, as there's some actual strategy and acrobatics required to keep from dying and starting the whole fight over. Plus, as I mentioned, this fight includes basically every NPC, as well as both Ratchet and Rivet sections. Again, I would have loved a playable Kit mech here, but the actual final phase with Rivet versus Emperor Nefarious is still a satisfying payoff, as you've learned about their conflict the entire game. Plus, the ending cutscene is really satisfying at tying up loose ends, leaving some threads open for villains to return again, and theoretically putting an end to the Dimensionator arc. Though with Rivet and Kit now displaced from their own dimension, and Ratchet finally willing to meet his fellow Bombaxes, I don't see this being the end of dimension hopping in general, just probably the end of the Dimensionator being used as a villain device. The credits also provide some nice closure and epilogue to the characters, and I like that cute art style a lot. In general, this game was just so heartwarming and epic at the same time, and it offered new insight into old characters, as well as expanding the universe with plenty of new characters, or at least alternate versions of our favorites. There's a ton to do outside of main missions, but also the Platinum Trophy isn't a chore to achieve. It's basically the perfect showcase of the PS5. It's beautiful, large in scale, and really shows off the appeal of instant loads with the solid-state drive. It's not only a fantastic Ratchet & Clank game, maybe even the best, it's also arguably the first must-have PS5 exclusive. Unless you're a big Demon's Souls fan. I don't want to step on that fan base. It's still not perfect, as I've mentioned. Aside from the game-breaking bugs that seem to get worse further into my challenge run, I also want to touch on more of the hit-or-miss weapon variety, since I can, share spoilers now. Some of them are fun gimmicks that just don't quite work as intended, such as the new Rhino, which is ridiculously powerful but doesn't make a lot of sense to aim. So it's more of a fun novelty to shoot in the distance and see all the Easter eggs, rather than something to actually use in the heat of battle. There's also a few too many passive weapons, such as the slow and awkward Ricochet that just hits over and over as you hold the fire button, or the Bombardier, I think? I might have gotten the name wrong. But it just fires down from above and doesn't do much and doesn't last very long. But then there's some absolute bangers, like the lightning gun that rapid fires and spreads between enemies, or the void repulsor that acts as a shield you can use while moving and then click in to release a blast and send stored bullets back at enemies. And there's a few that grew on me as I upgraded them, such as the Cold Sore? No, that's definitely not right. Cold Snap? I think it's Cold Snap. It freezes enemies in range, leaving them vulnerable to follow-up attacks, and then when the cube explodes, it causes area of effect freezing, making for really fun crowd control as enemies keep freezing each other. There's a lot of weapons I genuinely forgot about though, while others reached full potential in no time. They could have easily cut about 4 weapons to get a cleaner 2 weapon wheels, rather than having to switch between 3 wheels that weren't all full. But I could talk about this game forever, and eventually I'd just be going in circles. I kind of already have. So for now, let's move on and actually rank all the games. I'm going to include the PS4 remake in this ranking, even though it wasn't part of this retrospective, because I still really enjoy that game, and I kind of wanted to talk about it a little bit. So keep that in mind. It's technically a remake of the first game, but it's got enough of its own merit that I feel like it's still deserving of a rank, even though it wasn't deserving of a full review. Alright, so number 1, Rift Apart. I mean, come on. I just spent an hour talking about it. I feel like that's obvious. Really don't need to give any more into detail on it, but it's amazing. One of my favorite games. I mean, I just finished my challenge run and I kind of wanted to start it again. Like, it's ridiculous how good this game is, despite my issues with it. Number 2, A Crack in Time. This was my previous favorite before Rift Apart came out, so it's no surprise, it just kind of got bumped down one. Again, I've talked enough about how great this game is, but it is peak Ratchet and Clank. Honestly, if they made like a PS5 remake of this one, it would probably be number 1, because I like a lot of the gameplay elements more than Rift Apart. But there's so many cool things about Rift Apart that I can't help but put it higher. Number 3, the PS4 remake of Ratchet and Clank. I know, the story in this game is trash. It's adapted from a movie that didn't do well and didn't make a lot of sense, so the way they made this story work still doesn't really make sense in video game form, but the game is just so fun to play. Like, it has a lot of the same problems as the original Ratchet and Clank, with like the bad door unlock minigames and things like that, but it also fixes so many things and modernizes a lot of really cool stuff. Like, I love the hoverboot races, I love the weapon variety, I love the different planets for the most part. I don't love all the weapons, and I don't love that you can't get the platinum in that game without Groovatroning every enemy, I think it was, or Sheepinator? Groovatron? One of those. I don't remember which, but it's prevented me from getting the platinum, and I hate it. But the game itself is just so fun to play. Before Rift Apart came out, it was basically the culmination of the Ratchet & Clank series, because, you know, it brought back a lot of things from like the PS3 games and stuff into what was essentially a kind of a greatest hits of the last games, but it still has enough issues that it's not quite up there as an instant classic like Crack in Time is. Anyway, number 4, Into the Nexus. So this was kind of a tough one because overall I really enjoyed the game. I just thought it was too short. Like, everything it did was great. It was just only like 5 or 6 hours and I wanted more. So I mean, if it was like a, you know, quote-unquote full-length game, it would probably be above Crack in Time. Aside from the fact that the story's not as good. But it's just too short. Number 5, Tools of Destruction. I waffled a little bit on this one because it's not like the, you know, the classic that I think the PS2 games are. But ultimately, I think the gameplay is more polished, and, you know, the elements that it introduces evolved the series in a way that the PS2 games just didn't. So yeah, I could probably shift these next few around a little bit, but for now, I mean, the PS3 era is still a really solid evolution of the series. I gotta give it some credit. I just didn't like it as much as the others. Number 6, Going Commando. Yeah, again, I could probably switch the second and third PS2 games at any given time, just how I'm feeling day to day. But I think Going Commando has a bit more gameplay variety and stuff, whereas Up Your Arsenal is a lot more combat heavy. So ultimately, I think it is a better showing of, you know, the Ratchet & Clank series as a whole. Even if I don't really care for the story and all the experiment stuff. Number 7, Up Your Arsenal. This one's kind of a placeholder. It could be, I mean, 5, 6, and 7 really could be interchanged depending on the day. But Up Your Arsenal has a great library of weapons, a pretty fun story, and some solid pacing. And I really like the ship sections and kind of that variety. I just don't like how combat heavy it is. That bothers me a little bit. It very much feels like a prequel to Ratchet Deadlocked, and that kind of got old by the end. Like I've said before, there's not a bad Ratchet & Clank game. I mean, I started playing Secret Agent Clank on PSP, and even that's decent. Like, it's a little rough because the controls are, you know, PSP, but it's still fun. But anyway, I'm getting off the topic. Number 8, Quest for Booty. Again, there's some really solid stuff in this one, like the way it's a lot more kind of platforming and puzzle heavy and stuff, but it's like an hour long, and I couldn't even beat it because it glitched out. Like, that's not a good sign. So just because of kind of how uninspired it is, I can't put it above any of the other, like, full games. I honestly thought about making it last, but that didn't seem fair because I made it, you know, closer to the end in this one than I did to number 9, Ratchet & Clank. Yeah, I'm sorry. I told some people that I would give this game another try, and I still probably will. But I didn't want it to get in the way of, you know, this video or anything. So for now, it's at the bottom. And that does not mean it's a bad game. I can't reiterate that enough. Like, none of these are bad games. It's just one I liked the least. And that's my opinion. Like, it's a solid foundation, but it doesn't compare to these others. If it's your favorite, great. More power to you. I feel like some of that's nostalgia, but, you know, I'm not going to judge you. Like, I just personally don't see how it could be. So, yeah. That's my ranking. Please, let me know what you think of my ranking as well as your own. Just, you know, drop a little 1 through 9, or if you haven't played all the games, just, you know, number the ones that you have played. I think it'd be really fun. But yeah, I know a lot of these older games are stuck on the PS3, so I don't blame you if you haven't played all of them. And of course, you know, it's hard to get a PS5, so you might not have played Rift Apart yet, but I'm just kind of curious what other Ratchet & Clank fans think. And if you don't know anything about these, you probably didn't watch the last 2 retrospective videos where I did the PS2 games and PS3 games. So check those out, and if you want, just based on my reviews, let me know what you think your order would be. That could be fun if you haven't played them. But as far as this game is concerned, that's all I got. This is now 3 videos worth of Ratchet & Clank stuff. I think I can cool it for a bit. I love to discuss this stuff with you. I think it's a lot of fun. Like, I just want to gush about my favorite things, and if you want to gush about your favorite things as well, please, let us gush together. That sounded better in my head. Next time, I promised I would let you know what the next retrospective is going to be. So next time, I will see you with a retrospective on the 2D Metroid games. Obviously, we're leading into full hype season for Metroid Dread right now, so I kind of want to revisit those classics. Like, this one's going to be a little different because I friggin' love the Metroid games. Like, Ratchet & Clank, I hadn't beaten most of them, and I hadn't played really any of them in a long time. So that was more like kind of, you know, blind opinions. All 4 of these Metroid games I have played like ad nauseum over the years. So it's going to be a little harder to be like unbiased in my critique of them, but that's why I want to do it. I think it'll be fun. So yeah, I am very much looking forward to this. I hope you are too. But until then, have fun with some video games. Seriously, it seems like no one hates video games more than gamers. So just enjoy yourselves, man. Like, video games are cool. So have fun.
Sorry. I thought you were someone else, but you're not.
Is he okay?
I'm Ratchet.
Oh, that is great. Hello, Ratchet. Were you looking for me? That would be great, too. Ooh, can I call you Chet?
No. And no. I'm looking for some Blizon.
Oh, I know just the place. But I lost my access arm in all of this water. Have to drain it, but how, Ratch? How?
Calm down. I'll handle it.